We're continuing today looking at some of the faces around the cross, and we come now to what is one of the toughest faces that Jesus has to confront in John chapter 18. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and he asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves, judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace. He summoned Jesus and he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people, chief priests, handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "So you are a king then?" said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason that I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews and gathered there. And he said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. No offense intended, but is anyone else here, getting just a little tired of politicians this morning? Including those who are running for high office and claim not to be politicians. Listening to the debates, I've been reminded of what the wife of the late New York Governor Mario Cuomo once said to him. He was going to a campaign function some years ago, and she said, "Now, Mario, these people are very smart and very sophisticated. So don't try to be witty or charming, just be yourself." We are so divided as a nation. I even heard recently of a lifelong Republican who on his deathbed announced that he was switching to the Democratic Party. Someone asked him why he would do that after all those years, and he said, "Because I'd rather it was one of them that dies than one of us." All of which makes this encounter here in John 18 so appropriately relevant to us to talk about during this moment, during this high season of politics. Because you see, when Jesus stood before Pilate, it is clear that a political clash of cultures was about to take place that day in Jerusalem 20 centuries ago. On the one side were the chief priests and the Jewish teachers of the law, the elders, the grammatai, plainly on a mission to get rid of Jesus. John tells us, in fact, that morning they arrested him on the Mount of Olives, that they brought him to the Praetorium, the palace where Pilate was staying in Jerusalem. It's a place the Roman governor tried to avoid most of the time because he didn't like it. He preferred being down on the coast, Caesarea, better breezes, close to where a ship could take him back to Rome if he wanted to visit. He only came to Jerusalem when he had to. And Passover was one of those times. He had to be there in case of trouble. Sure enough, there was trouble that day. He hadn't even finished his breakfast, I suspect, when a delegation came to see him. Don't you hate that? You're barely up, and the phone rings. Or you get an email or a text. You've done nothing but rise from your slumber, and already you're enmeshed in it. Never a good way to start the workday. To make matters even worse, the Jewish leaders wouldn't even go into the palace, so Pilate had to come out of the palace into the colonnade to speak with them there. You see, they hadn't celebrated Passover yet. They didn't want to defile themselves ceremonially by going inside a Gentile's house, even if that Gentile was the Roman governor. That little detail which John gives us tells us a lot, I think. If we accept that the fourth writer didn't get his chronology all mixed up and he wasn't just trying to make some sort of a theological point, those Jewish leaders had missed celebrating the Passover the night before when Jesus and his disciples observed it because they were so hyped up about catching him, so engrossed in how they're going to pull off their plans and their plot, they never quite got around to the meal that busy night. In short, they were so ready to defend their religion, they didn't see the irony of neglecting their religion, of observing their religion, when everybody else would have been doing so. The priests and leaders clearly panting for the death of Jesus. They didn't even blink, making up spurious false charges against him. On the other side of those Jewish leaders was Jesus himself, who seemed strangely unaffected by the whole drama going on all around him, almost as if he knew what was coming, and he knew his part. Jesus didn't fight back. He didn't try to argue his case out with the leaders of his own people. He knew their hearts were already hardened. And so there in the middle between the Jewish leaders and Jesus was the politician Pontius Pilate. Despite his ability to be brutal at times, not particularly a bad person or even a bad ruler. His career produced the second longest tenure of any Roman governor of Judea in those centuries. It was not easy to govern those people from 26 to 36 AD. And Pilate did a fairly difficult job well. He had a conscience. He had a sense of justice. He tried to generally do right by the people who came before him, even the troublesome Jews whose beliefs he didn't really understand, but which he attempted at least to respect. And so when they brought Jesus before him that morning, Pilate, we may say, did his best to get at what was really going on in that dispute before being spilled out on his doorstep. In fact, compared to everybody else that day, Pilate's face may have been the most sympathetic of all the faces into which Jesus looked. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of England, once commented, in fact, that Pilate commands our moral attention, not because he was a bad man, but because he was so nearly a good man. He asked the Jewish leaders what charges, categories, complaints that they were bringing against Jesus. They could only give a kind of lame answer. It wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important, if it wasn't serious. He told the priests and elders to go judge Jesus by their own law. They objected, we can't kill him. Only you can do that. And so Pilate went back inside. He summoned Jesus, began to question him for himself, without the Jewish leaders. Are you the king of the Jews? What he wanted to know was that if Jesus had claimed a title for himself that no one in Israel since Herod the Great had been allowed to use. Jesus said, is that your idea? Or has somebody been talking to you? And Pilate responded by saying, do I look Jewish to you? It's not exactly what he said, but you get the point. So Jesus told him plainly, my kingdom is not of this world. It's interesting to me that Jesus was careful to use that adjective, my, 4 times in these few verses. He wanted Pilate to be clear that he's talking about himself, not some abstract theological theory. Pilate still didn't get it. Jesus went further with him. He said, look, my kingdom, my basileia, that's the word that means rule or reign in Greek, comes from the word baino, meaning just to stand and to walk. My kingdom, the basis of my authority, that upon which I stand, that which I walk upon, Jesus said, it's not like yours, Pilate. It's not about having external or arbitrary power over people. It's about having credibility with others just because of who you are. The kingdom of which Jesus rules, he told Pilate, is a kingdom of truth. Truth. The Roman governor didn't get that either. Replied somewhat famously, what is truth? Quid est veritas? So the Latin renders it. With that, Pilate went back out to where the Jewish leaders were waiting, and he said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But being a consummate politician. You should notice that apparently Pilate found no basis for believing Jesus either. When it came to the truth, Pilate didn't even want to discuss it. So when all was said and done that day, and Pilate eventually gave in to the demands of the crowd that had come to his front porch after breakfast that morning, agreeing to condemn Jesus to be crucified, that's how Pilate was to be forever remembered. Not for any of the good decisions that he might have made over his 10-year tenure in that troubled and rebellious Roman province, but for the one truly tragic one, summed up in the words of the ancient creed we've all known from our childhood. Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. I have a feeling Pilate's every instinct might have been telling him Jesus was innocent. But when the truth confronted him, it was inconvenient. He couldn't accept it. He looked right into the face of truth, and he refused to recognize it. You can understand that, I think. There is perhaps nothing more endangered in this world today than the idea of truth itself. We've relativized it. We've compartmentalized it. We've assigned it to different categories. We've said, my truth is not your truth. It doesn't have to be. Someone once said, truth is what we see when we see God. The problem is, none of us like to be told the truth sometimes, especially when it's so unflattering to our own self-image. So we get mad at people that tell us the truth rather than deal with it. We don't outright deny it. At the very least, we make excuses. I read some time ago of some of the reasons truck drivers gave when explaining their accidents to people. One of them said, coming home, I drove into the wrong yard, and I hit a tree that I don't have. So another said that the telephone pole was approaching fast. I attempted to swerve out of its path when it hit me. Truth is hard for us to admit sometimes. Yet I would submit to you that it is only the truth about ourselves, truth about God, the truth about life, which can genuinely set us free from whatever chains and burdens we may be dragging around with us this morning. If Pilate had recognized the truth that day when Jesus came before him, he too should have experienced an entirely different outcome in his life. I would suggest to you in this Lenten season that we too stand face to face with Jesus, and just like Pilate, he will not play word games with us either. Either we stand in the truth or we don't. And if we do, then it won't matter what the culture may say. It won't matter if all the world stands against us. Because the kingdom of Christ is not of this world. It's in it. And I would suggest it is over it. But it's not of it. I just say it doesn't play by the world's rules. It never has. The question today is a simple one. Are you following Christ, even when the culture may not be? No matter what our politicians may promise, even no matter what they may actually do, our culture, I fear, is slipping further and further away from genuine kingdom values every day. In turn, the pressure on us to conform and get with the program is growing. But may I be plain with you this morning? Our mission is not just to be nice and get along with society. Our mission is to transform society, which we cannot do if we've already surrendered to it, or allowed our message to somehow simply be that we all ought to play nice and get along with others. Retired Bishop Will Willimon, former professor at Duke and a mentor to our own friend Mike Wayne, tells of a man named Joe whose family lived almost next door to Will's church when he was serving one. The yard was always a mess. The children seemed to be an afterthought in terms of their caring. The rumors were that this man, Joe, got drunk frequently. He abused his wife and he cursed his children. So Will's church said they were going to help him. Will visited the home. Some of the youth went by and they invited his kids on a summer mission trip. The women's group asked her to come to their annual day of prayer, and sure enough, the man and his family came for a few Sundays, but then they quit coming. And the church in turn, I suppose, quit trying. That was the last Will heard of him. Till a few months later when he met him on the street. Will didn't recognize him at first. He looked so different. He said, "Joe, is that you?" And Joe said, "Well, it's mostly me. I've changed." And Will could see that. His whole physical appearance looked different. And come to think of it, even his front yard had changed. It looked great. So what had happened? Joe told Will how a few weeks before a group had come by to pray with him after they heard that he'd been out on a drunken binge. But these folks were not from Will's nice middle-class Methodist church. These folks were from a fundamentalist church, a congregation across town that was fire-baptized, spirit-breathing, God-fearing, Bible-believing, washed in the blood holy rollers. They told Joe that if he didn't stop drinking and beating his wife, he was going to die and burn forever in hell. They told him that God was coming to get him and that God was mad. They told him that he had better give himself up to Jesus or else. And you know what? They got his attention. They got him to their church, where they prayed for him by name, and they asked God to love Joe and let Joe live a little bit longer until he could get him saved. And Joe got saved. Turned inside out, upside down, saved. Will Willimon said something about how he was sorry that his church had been unable to meet Joe's needs. Joe said, "Preacher, don't feel bad. Your church gave me aspirin, but I needed massive chemotherapy." You know what he's saying? Not that churches like ours and Willimon's are wrong or that we need to turn Pentecostal in our outreach approach. And I certainly don't believe in trying to scare people into heaven by describing the ambient temperature of hell. But there comes a time, I think, when we need to be entirely intentional about telling people the truth about themselves and about ourselves, the truth about God. Long ago, Jesus Christ looked into the face of a politician and he told them, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. I wonder, who are you listening to this morning? Amen.